In the stillness of the dark night, a small, slender shadow moves at a calm, unhurried pace. It has the presence of a creature that is not afraid of being seen simply because it almost never allows humans to see it. This is the pine marten. Scientific name: Martes, a mysterious nocturnal carnivorous killer, weighing less than 1.5 kilograms, once wiped out by humans so severely that it seemed to have vanished completely from the ecological map. But what astonished ecological researchers was not the appearance of the pine marten, but what was happening around it. In the very forest where this camera recorded the footage, the population of North American gray squirrels, the brutal invasive species that had dominated and swept through the ecosystems of the British Isles for the past 150 years, was collapsing at an unprecedented speed. The strange part is this: no human hunting campaign had been launched. Not a single drop of poison had been spread, no trapping team, no modern machinery, and not even $1 of conservation funding had been released for this forest. Nobody had done anything at all. Look back at the full historical picture to understand how absurd this really is. For 150 years, grey squirrels had swept across Britain and Ireland. They crushed the native red squirrel, pushing this poor animal close to total extinction. Millions of pounds and euros from government conservation funds and non-government organizations were poured into this war. Scientists built barriers, set lethal traps, created feeding stations, and used genetic tracking technology. But everything ended in bitter failure. Whenever humans pulled back, grey squirrels surged back, like a rising tide. So what is truly happening inside the ancient forests of Ireland and Britain? How can one small carnivorous animal single-handedly end a large-scale biological invasion that has lasted more than a century, something that top scientific minds and massive budgets had been helpless to solve? Before we begin, hit subscribe and like the video if you are still following this story. Today's collapse began 5,000 years ago, when the British Isles were still covered by a vast primeval forest, known as the ancient Caledonian Forest. At that time, from the Rocky Mountains of the Scottish Highlands to the damp valleys of Wales and Ireland, a continuous green belt of ancient oaks, beeches, Scots pines, and native maples covered up to 80% of the land. It was a complex living network, where every creature held an irreplaceable link. In that ancient world, the native red squirrel, Squirrus vulgaris, was the sole resident of the forest canopy. With its charming tufted ears, copper-red fur, and modest body weight of only about 250 to 300 grams, the red squirrel was the forest's most important seed disperser. They hid thousands of acorns and pine seeds beneath the leaf litter for winter. Millions of forgotten seeds sprouted each year, turning red squirrels into silent, forest builders. And the species that kept red squirrel populations healthy and prevented them from exploding was the pine marten. Living hidden among the high branches, the pine marten is one of the most skilled climbers in the weasel family. With retractable claws and ankles that can rotate 180 degrees, allowing it to run headfirst down vertical tree trunks, the pine marten and the red squirrel took part in an evolutionary dance, lasting more than 20,000 years, since the last ice age. Pine martens hunted red squirrels, but they never wiped them out. The presence of a predator forced red squirrels to maintain a high level of alertness and move flexibly along small branches at the outer edge of the canopy, places pine martens struggled to reach. The weak and sick were removed, the strong and agile survived and passed on better genes. The forest ecosystem maintained a perfect dynamic balance for thousands of years without any intervention from human hands. That beautiful balance began to be torn apart when humans entered the age of urbanization and industrialization. In the early 19th century, aristocrats and wealthy estate owners in England, Scotland, and Ireland developed an intense passion for recreational shooting. They turned thousands of hectares of natural forest into artificial pheasant and grouse estates. To them, any natural predator that could threaten their game birds was considered a pest monster that had to be exterminated. A bloody slaughter was launched across the country. Estate managers used steel traps, shotguns, and especially widespread strychnine poisoning. Pine martens, along with wild dogs, eagles, and wildcats, became prime targets. In less than a century, pine martens were wiped out from 99% of England and Wales, pushed to the edge of total extinction, with only a few individuals holding on in the remote mountains of far northern Scotland. Humans had used traps and guns to remove the only ecological break in the broadleaf forest system. The ecological room was now completely without a guardian. In 1876, at the Henbury Park estate in Cheshire, England, a wealthy landowner named Thomas Legge imported several pairs of North American grey squirrels from the eastern United States and released them into his garden as ornamental animals. He had no idea that this reckless act had opened the most terrifying ecological Pandora's box in the history of the British Isles. The grey squirrel, a large, aggressive creature weighing twice as much as the red squirrel, from 500 to 600 grams, had entered a paradise with no natural enemy. Pine martens had been wiped out by humans, broadleaf forests were full of food, and an uncontrollable invasion officially began. Thanks to the absence of predators, North American grey squirrels multiplied exponentially. By the early 21st century, from only a few ornamental animals at the beginning, the grey squirrel population had exploded beyond 2.7 million across the United Kingdom and Ireland. They swept through and occupied up to 80% of the remaining broadleaf forests. This invasion pushed the native red squirrel into an unequal massacre. With their superior body size, grey squirrels consumed young acorns before red squirrels could collect them. Native red squirrel numbers collapsed terribly from millions of individuals down to fewer than 140,000 across the entire United Kingdom, with more than 80% forced to retreat and hold on in the nutrient-poor conifer forests of far northern Scotland. But the greatest tragedy did not stop with competition for food. North American grey squirrels carried a brutal, invisible biological weapon, squirrelpox virus, or SQPV. Millions of years of evolution in North America helped grey squirrels develop natural immunity. They carry the virus in their blood without showing illness, becoming mobile reservoirs of disease. But for the native red squirrel, a species that had never encountered this pathogen, squirrelpox virus is a cruel death sentence. When red squirrels come into contact with the waste or saliva of grey squirrels at feeding stations, the virus attacks, causing necrosis around the mouth, eyes, and feet, producing severe sores, blindness, internal bleeding, and death in agony within only 15 days. The mortality rate for red squirrels infected with squirrelpox can reach 99%. Grey squirrels did not only steal the house, they spread a biological poison to erase the original owner of that house. Grey squirrels did not stop at wiping out red squirrels. They also caused serious economic and environmental damage. In summer, when food becomes scarce, grey squirrels perform bark stripping to eat the sweet cambium tissue beneath. They peel the bark from young oaks, beeches, and maples between 10 and 40 years old. Millions of trees across the British Isles suffer tissue death and die standing. The British forestry industry carries estimated losses of more than £37 million every year. More importantly, mass tree death destroys carbon absorption capacity, degrades the understory, and causes countless native insects and birds to lose their habitat. A full ecological crisis had pushed British conservation into a state of red alert. Facing the risk that red squirrels could be erased forever and forests could be devastated, the British government, Irish authorities, and a series of major conservation organizations launched an ecological war on a scale never seen before. Tens of millions of euros in public funding were released. Professional grey squirrel control groups were formed across counties. Humans deployed every technology and method they could think of. They set tens of thousands of mechanical traps across forests. They spread the anticoagulant poison warfarin at artificial feeding stations. They tested food containing chemical sterilization agents. They even brought in geneticists to map DNA and search for gene editing methods to destroy the grey squirrel population at its source. In England alone, between 30,000 and 50,000 grey squirrels are removed every year. But what was the final result? A complete and humiliating failure. The human campaign fell into an endless biological loop that researchers call the sponge effect. When a trapping team removed a few hundred grey squirrels from one patch of forest, they thought they had won, but that action only created a temporary resource gap. Immediately, grey squirrels from nearby woodlands surged in to fill that empty space within just a few weeks. Because food suddenly became more abundant, the remaining grey squirrels reproduced more, and more young survived. The more brutally humans removed them, the more the invasive population exploded to compensate. Whenever project funding ended or trapping teams withdrew, grey squirrels reoccupied the same areas at even higher density than before. Humans were trapped in an arrogant way of thinking, using money and machines to fight the biological laws of nature. Everything changed only when ecologists realized they were suffering from shifting baseline syndrome. They understood that they were trying to repair the forest by killing grey squirrels, while forgetting why grey squirrels had been able to spread so freely in the first place, because humans had wiped out the pine marten 200 years earlier. In 2015, a revolutionary project was launched, the Pine Marten Recovery Project in Wales, carried out by the Vincent Wildlife Trust in cooperation with the University of Exeter and Forestry England. Instead of continuing to burn money on poison and traps, they decided to carry out a rewilding campaign, bringing pine martens back into the forests of Wales and Central Ireland. This was an ecological military operation calculated down to the smallest detail. Scientists collected healthy pine martens from the great forests of Scotland, where rare surviving pine marten populations still remained. Each individual was brought into a laboratory, tested for DNA to ensure genetic diversity, vaccinated against viruses, and fitted with an ultralight GPS tracking device. The pine martens were then placed inside large acclimation cages built deep in the forests of Wales for several weeks. They were given natural food to adapt to the local environment before the cage doors were opened at night. From 2015 to 2021, dozens of pine martens were successfully reintroduced. Immediately, a network of infrared camera traps and non-invasive DNA sampling systems using collected droppings was spread across thousands of hectares of forest to track every movement of this hunting machine. As soon as the first pine martens stepped out of their metal cages, the project immediately faced an unprecedented wave of doubt and fierce opposition from the media, farming groups, and even part of the traditional conservation community. A difficult question appeared on the front pages of British newspapers: both grey squirrels and red squirrels are squirrels. The pine marten is an opportunistic predator. How can a carnivore know the difference between an invasive grey squirrel that needs to be removed and a native red squirrel that needs to be protected? This doubt was completely reasonable from a biological theory perspective. The pine marten is not an intelligent machine that has been programmed. When hungry, it will attack any creature moving through the canopy. Opponents pointed to a terrifying risk if pine martens swept through both squirrel species. Humans would not be saving the ecosystem. They would be releasing a bloodthirsty killer that could push the already weakened red squirrel down into the abyss of extinction even faster. Poultry keepers and estate owners in Wales protested against the project. They feared pine martens would enter farms, kill chickens, damage native songbird populations, and disrupt rural life. Petitions demanding that the reintroduction project be stopped were sent to Parliament. The Pine Marten Recovery Project stood at risk of permanent suspension. Scientists were forced to confront a life-or-death evolutionary question: was the pine marten truly the solution, or was this just another reckless human mistake in trying to play God? The answer to this double dilemma did not lie in human technology. It lay in 20,000 years of shared evolutionary history between pine martens and red squirrels, proven through the groundbreaking research of Dr. Emma Sheehy. When thousands of pine marten scat samples collected from forests were processed through DNA sequencing machines, scientists received a result with a stunning imbalance. Gray squirrel DNA appeared in pine marten droppings 15 to 20 times more often than red squirrel DNA. Pine martens truly killed gray squirrels heavily, while native red squirrels remained almost unharmed. The pine marten is an extremely smart calorie-calculating predator. An adult North American gray squirrel weighs 500 to 600 grams, providing a large amount of meat and fat. Meanwhile, a native red squirrel weighs only around 250 grams. For the pine marten, spending energy to hunt a gray squirrel delivers twice the nutritional return compared with chasing a small red squirrel. Native red squirrels have lived alongside pine martens for tens of thousands of years. The instinctive fear of pine marten droppings and urine has been carved deep into the red squirrel's genes. As soon as it smells the predator within a range of several hundred meters, the red squirrel immediately retreats to the highest, smallest branches at the outer edge of the canopy where its light 250-gram body can hold on, but the 1.5-kilogram pine marten cannot reach. By contrast, gray squirrels evolved in North America, where pine martens were not part of their ecological experience. They are completely ecologically blind. When a pine marten appears, gray squirrels do not recognize the danger, do not fear the pine marten's scent, continue calmly foraging on the ground, and become extremely easy prey. With their heavy bodies, gray squirrels spend up to 70% of the day searching for food on the ground and in the lower tree layers. This is the pine marten's death hunting zone. Red squirrels are the opposite. They spend 80% of their time high in the canopy, moving flexibly from branch to branch, and rarely coming down to the ground. But the truth is even more complicated, and more ruthless. The presence of pine martens creates an environment of extreme psychological stress for gray squirrels. Cortisol levels, the stress hormone, surge in their blood. This intense fear completely changes the physiology of the invasive species. Female gray squirrels become so stressed that they stop mating or abandon their young in the nest. Gray squirrel reproduction collapses naturally. Instead of spending time feeding and storing fat for winter, gray squirrels have to spend all their time watching for ambush. When the freezing winter arrives, large numbers of gray squirrels collapse from physical exhaustion. In the counties of Longford, Lowes, and Wicklow in Ireland, as well as in mid-Wales, an ecological miracle unfolded only 5 to 7 years after pine martens were reintroduced. The North American gray squirrel population, the species that had dominated completely for 150 years and defeated every human removal effort, automatically collapsed to zero in forests where pine martens had settled. And when the gray squirrels retreated, the squirrelpox virus, or SQPV, that had once devastated the native species also disappeared with them. With no food competitor left, and no deadly necrotic disease remaining, the native red squirrel began stepping out of the remote conifer forests of the far north. They surged southward, reclaiming the ancient woodlands of their homeland where their ancestors had once been driven away. Red squirrel numbers in Ireland and Wales began rising sharply again, something conservationists in the 20th century had once called an impossible mission. When grey squirrels disappeared, their destructive bark-stripping behavior came to an end. Millions of young oaks, beeches, and maples began recovering, continuing to grow their canopies, absorbing thousands of tons of carbon emissions, and protecting the forest floor from erosion. The returning red squirrels brought back their intelligent seed-burying behavior. Thousands of young oak trees began sprouting naturally across the forest floor, rebuilding the multi-layered structure of the woodland. As the forest healed, native songbirds, rare insects, and small mammals began returning. The pine marten, in its role as a top predator, cleaned out weak rodents and helped keep the entire ecological pyramid in its healthiest state. This campaign created a scientific and policy precedent with global meaning. It shattered the old conservation mindset that relied on rough mechanical human intervention traps, poison, and guns. It showed the world the powerful force of rewilding, restoring top predators so nature can heal itself. The pine marten taught humanity a deep lesson in humility. We, with all our technology, money, machines, and modern science, had been powerless for 150 years against one invasive squirrel. But nature, once humans took a step back and returned the role to a tiny 1.5 kilogram predator, solved the problem perfectly and for free. However, this victory is not truly complete, and the ecological war is not over. Pine martens are recovering strongly in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, but across much of England, especially the heavily populated southeast, where landscapes are severely divided by highways, North American grey squirrels still dominate. Pine martens struggle to move and survive through forests fragmented by concrete and modern human transport infrastructure. If humans continue covering green corridors with concrete, pine martens will not be able to reach those forests, and grey squirrels will continue spreading. Ecological balance is not a fixed eternal state. It is a continuous battle of intelligence between human destruction and nature's ability to heal itself. 214a. M. Galway Old-Growth Forest. The infrared camera trap still quietly blinks its yellow timestamp beneath the rotting oak. In the silent darkness, that small, slender shadow passes by again, fast, graceful, and silent. Humans needed 150 years to realize a simple truth: we are not gods managing the earth. We are only clumsy latecomers. Nature does not need humans to rescue it. Nature only needs us to learn how to let go, stop destroying, and return enough space for those 1.5 kilogram shadows of the night to keep carrying out their mission that has lasted for millions of years.